Vladimir Putin's diplomatic push in Middle East seals both Syria's fate and diminishing role of the U.S. in the region. Exactly 1 year ago, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, with Russia's help, was laying waste to the last rebel-held neighborhoods of Aleppo. Cluster bombs and bunker busters fell out of the sky like rain, one resident said at the time. Children mistook the bright lights of phosphorus munitions for fireworks. The fall of Aleppo turned the tide of the civil war in the regime's favor. And this week, as Russian President Vladimir Putin meets with Mr. Assad and his Iranian and Turkish counterparts to discuss a framework for post-conflict Syria, his role as the Middle East's most important foreign deal-breaker is secured. When U.S. President Donald Trump and Mr. Putin met in Vietnam earlier this month, they issued a joint statement reiterating their country's desire for a political rather than military solution for Syria's civil war now in its 7th year. Mr. Putin, several U.S. State Department sources said, promised full commitment to the UN-backed peace process in Geneva. Fresh talks begin there on the 29th of November. But after years of failed negotiations in both Switzerland and Riyadh, Western-sponsored efforts at peace appear to be structurally broken, as Beirut-based Century Foundation fellow Sam Heller says, and Russia's efforts are coming to the fore. An adversarial, binary regime opposition dynamic is at the heart of Geneva, and it is totally unworkable, he told The Independent. What Russia seems to be doing is creating an array of parallel processes that can move things forward, even as Geneva and its Western sponsors are stuck in place. The Russians are insistent that these other processes aren't meant to undermine Geneva. With processes like Sochi, Russia can address the key elements of UN Security Council Resolution 2254, which calls for a political solution in Syria outside Geneva's dysfunctional process, then drop them into Geneva to be ratified and given international legitimacy. To that end, Sochi, the sleepy beach town that serves as President Putin's winter residence, has over recent days turned into a frenzied center of global diplomacy. In less than 72 hours, the Russian leadership has held discussions with the United States, Syria, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Israel and Egypt, all with a view to cementing Russia's role as a key player in the region. The trilateral conference between Russia, Iran and Turkey is the pinnacle of Mr. Putin's diplomatic marathon. It followed a surprise precursory meeting between Mr. Putin and Mr. Assad in Sochi on Monday. Iran has long been a consistent ally to Russia on Syria, especially on the matter of Mr. Assad's leadership. Turkey has supported rebel groups against Assad since Arab Spring protests began in 2011, and was at one stage even in open conflict with Russia. In a joint statement, leaders Vladimir Putin, Hassan Rouhani and Recep Tayyip Erdogan committed to what they described as the post-conflict phase in Syria's war. There are many unresolved sticking points. On Thursday, a senior advisor to President Assad said that Russia's planned December talks bringing the regime and Syrian opposition to the table will only succeed if the rebels first lay down their arms. Turkey also reiterated that Mr. Assad staying on as president is still a red line. Nonetheless, there is agreement to work together in all areas in Syria. The three foreign powers will work as guarantor states to enforce de-escalation zones and encourage political progress. They would help build schools, hospitals and playgrounds. In his comments to the press on Wednesday, Mr. Putin said Russian efforts would soon switch from the battlefield to reconstruction. Military cooperation had saved Syria from collapse, he said. Long-term normalization was now possible. Mr. Putin will feel satisfied about what the conference says about Russian power in the region, especially as the Trump administration fails to put forward its long-term foreign policy goals. Much has changed since his military entered the conflict in September 2015. Thanks to its often brutal support operations, Russia has helped Assad fight back from the brink to rule what is left of his country with confidence again. ISIS, thanks to both Russian and U.S. air power, clings on to a fraction of the territory it controlled at the height of its powers in 2014. In diplomatic circles, one's strident calls that Assad must go are no longer very loud. And the U.S. position on Mr. Assad once a red line is no longer a precondition for a settlement, although Washington said this week